Well, good morning. It is Nick Collier here, and we're going to try something a little bit different today. I'm actually going to tell you a story about my life. It's a beautiful June morning. It's going to be about 100 degrees out today, and we're doing this early in the morning so that it's nice and cool. We're in my wife's garden, as you can see. She loves the wildness of gardens. I am the kind of person who likes to have rows and nice and neat and pull up all the weeds. Anyhow, we'll get past that. Today's story is going to be about, of course, we got the little bugs. Today's story is going to be about Oregon Creek Falls and how it's been a constant in my most of my adult life since I moved up here. Now, when I was in my early 20s, 1973, I decided to take a vacation. I was tired of the Bay Area. I needed to get out. I decided to take a vacation up in the Sierra foothills in the eastern part of California, northeastern part of California. And so I got in my car and I drove up to Sonora, and I just took Highway 49, which is this little crookly back road all the way north, just following that road. Because when I was a kid, my folks used to go up into the old gold country and, dig around and have fun. So I got in my car, and, as I said, so I traveled all the way north looking for a new place to live. And, I went through all these little towns, Volcano and Placerville and Auburn, and somewhere in Auburn, it was late afternoon, I picked up a hitchhiker coming north, and he and I got to talking, and I says, hey, you know of a place to camp out? And he says, I know of the perfect place to camp out. He says, in fact, that's where I'm going. So I drove north of Nevada City about 20 miles out past North San Juan to Oregon Creek. And if you've ever been to Oregon Creek, you'll know that it's this beautiful, kind of all year flowing creek that runs over these solid white granite boulders that have been carved with time and with the water and with the weather, just crystal white. Anyhow, so we get to the Oregon Creek Falls campground, which was this renegade campground kind of back in the forest a bit. There was probably 10 different campers back there. And he says, okay, set up your camp and I'll set up mine, and we'll go and check out the falls. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of cool, this is a nice little campground. And so after about a half hour or so, he comes and gets me, and he says, okay, let's go check out the falls. And, I'm looking for a place to live, right? And this is a beautiful place. And we go down into the creek and walk the creek going downstream for about, I don't know, it was about a quarter mile, just kind of meandering through. And I'm thinking, oh, man, this is a really beautiful place. And, I want to just stay here. And so we come out into this opening, and with these huge white granite boulders, and there was like 20 naked women sitting on these rocks. And I put up my hands and I went, I'm home. And I stayed there for 2 weeks actually, and oogled all the women and had a great time, and I think I even got laid 2 or 3 times. Went back to the Bay Area, finished up my 1 year in college, and decided I'm moving to Nevada City. So that next spring, I moved to Nevada City, and of course the water was cold at that point, so I couldn't really go back to the falls until that next spring. And the falls were there, and the the young naked people were there, and I was naked, and everybody was running around having a great time. And I met this couple, and they were really nice people. I really enjoyed talking with them, and they invited me to come out to their hippie commune. And so, one thing led to another. That autumn, I ended up moving to the hippie commune, and stayed there for a year. Fast forward about 20 years. In that 20 years, every summer, I would go back to Oregon Creek Falls, especially in the early spring, because it was the first water that warmed up enough that you could actually get in it. And so I'd go back every year, and until I was about 50. And at 50, I came up with this, birth defect heart problem. And the doc says, you got to take this little white pill. And I'm, I said, well, do I have to? He says, well, that's no problem, but you live out in the woods, and one day your heart's going to stop beating because you aren't taking this pill, and you're probably going to just die. And just thought, okay, I'll take the pill. So my wife and I at the time, well, no, it's my current wife. My wife and I went to Oregon Creek Falls. And I had been taking this pill for about 2 weeks, and it just wiped me out. I mean, I was just like barely able to maneuver around. And I have to say that after about 3 months or 4 months, my body got used to it, and I was back to normal. But for that 2 or 3 months, it was pretty difficult. And I thought I was going to be that way the rest of my life, and I was pretty worried. So anyhow, we went to Oregon Creek Falls. It's midsummer, the water's running over the falls, and I'm just going to try to give you a picture of it, an actual picture. And I'm not feeling top of my game, and I'm sitting there on the rocks and having a just kind of a relaxing time, and I'm noticing these young guys grab onto this rope swing and swing across the creek over to another set of boulders on the other side of the creek, and then swing back. And I thought, oh man, I can do that. That looks easy. So I swung across, and then for some reason or another, I let go of the rope, and the rope swung to the center, and I didn't have a rope any longer. So I thought, okay, well, that's no problem. I'll just walk upstream a bit and cross over the creek and come back. And I did. I walked upstream, and I started to cross over the creek, and there was a series of rocks that kind of went across, and it looked like they were really good and solid, so it was not like a problem. So I stepped on the first rock, and I reached over with my foot and stepped on the second rock, and I think what had happened is somebody had actually sat on that rock. Bugs. Somebody had actually sat on that rock with suntan oil, and I hit that rock, and my foot went right out from underneath me. And I'm sitting over the falls, on the top of the falls, and I slipped. I went into the water. The water was rushing pretty heavy. I reached over actually with my left arm and grabbed this rock to see if I could hang on, and the water just pushed me back and dislocated my shoulder. And my arm's up like this, and I go over back first, down 15 or 20 feet onto the rocks. And I'm pretty much dead. I'd just given it up at that point. Now, what had happened, and I knew what was down there. I had seen it many times. But the winter before, it was a pretty heavy winter. There was a lot of water, and the water had literally washed out all of the rocks out of that area. And I fell down into a ravine that couldn't have been more than 2 feet across and 6 feet deep in water, head first, on my back. I hit the water. I came up. I tried to call my wife. I'm sitting there with my arm up like this, and I can't move it. And the water's rushing past me. Now, the problem is that I'm now halfway down the falls. I go around if I allow myself to go around the next rock, I go over another falls, which is about, I don't know, it's about a 10-foot drop. And the water's cold, and I'm screaming for my wife, and nobody hears me. And I'm there for probably 20 minutes. And finally, my wife can't figure out what happened to me, and she comes looking, and she finds me down in this little gully with the waterfall, crushing me, and me just trying to hang on to the rocks so that I don't go over the next falls. And she's like, what do I do? And so I said, go over and get those guys and have them come help me. And so the guys came over, and they rolled me out of the, they kind of got into the water, and they said, okay, let go. And I let go, and I come around the bend in the falls, and they caught me, and they drug me up onto the granite boulder in the warm, and I'm freezing my ass at that point. And so I got a dislocated shoulder, and I say to the guy, okay, I need you, and I had seen this done before, so I knew it could be done. I says, here I am 20 miles out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm on my motorcycle, right? And so how am I going to drive my motorcycle with one arm in the air? And so my wife says, oh, we'll call an ambulance. And I'm thinking, okay, an ambulance is going to take an hour or two to get here, because I'm way out in the woods. And I thought, well, let's just put my arm back in place, and we'll be fine. So I told the guy. He said, oh, no, I can't do that. You'll sue me. I says, I don't even know who you are, so don't worry about it. Just take my arm, take my hand, and you're just going to pull gently away from me. And he pulls, and my arm pops back in, and everything's fine. And I'm like, okay, I'm good. Now, of course, I was good for the moment because the adrenaline was still flowing, but it took probably 3 or 4 months for that arm to heal enough to where I could actually use it again. So anyhow, I say thank you to those 3 guys. My wife and I get our gear together. We go back up to the motorcycle, and we drive home, and everything's fine, except for physical therapy for the next 3 months. So you'd think that's the end of the story, right? 20 years later, I got my granddaughter. We drove out to Oregon Creek Falls. I hadn't been there in probably 5 or 6 years, because I'm older now, and naked women don't really attract me that much anymore. And going to the river is nice from time to time. So I got my granddaughter. We go down to Oregon Creek Falls. We're sitting there on on the big granite slabs, and I'm telling her this story about how I came over the falls, and she's like, "Oh, that's not true. You couldn't have done that." And, because I'm always bullshitting her anyhow. But she was like, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And I'm sitting there pointing out, and I'm standing right where I was, and I says I was in the water right there, and I came from that cliff edge right there on my head, and I hit the water. And lo and behold, a guy walks up and he says, I was there. I helped you that day. This is 20 years later. I helped you that day. And my granddaughter looks at me, she goes, no. And I'm like, yeah, this has really happened. So anyhow, that's the story of at least one little segment of my life. Oregon Creek Falls have been a pretty standard thing for most of my adult life at the time that I've lived here in Nevada City. So that's our story. We're going to check out with that. Thanks for listening. This is Nick Collier, checking out.